The world never tells you how loud Failure Island. It isn't a silent, dignified retreat. It's the deafening, metallic shriek of the factory siren at 5 a.m. A sound that claws its way into your dreams and drags you back to a reality you despise. It's the constant, grinding roar of machinery that vibrates through the soles of your worn-out work boots and into your very bones, a reminder that you are just another cog, another replaceable part in a vast, uncaring machine. For Leo, that sound was the anthem of his life, a daily confirmation that he was stuck. Leo was 28, but his eyes, often shadowed with a fatigue that sleep couldn't fix, made him look older. He worked at Grayson's Machine Parts, a sprawling, greasy monument to monotony on the outskirts of a city that never slept but never seemed to wake up to people like him. His job was to stand at Conveyor Belt 7, inspecting a never-ending river of metal brackets. Good bracket, place it on the left. Flawed bracket, toss it into the reject bin on the right. Good, flawed, good, flawed. For 8 hours, with 2 15-minute breaks and a half hour for a lukewarm lunch. His father, Arthur, had worked at Grayson's for 40 years before a faulty lung, filled with decades of metal dust, finally forced him to retire. He was proud of it. He'd framed his Employee of the Month certificate from 1998 and hung it in their small, cluttered living room. To Arthur, a steady job, a loyal wife, a roof that didn't leak too much, that was the pinnacle of success. It was a quiet, humble victory, won through decades of unwavering duty. But Leo wanted to scream every time he looked at that certificate. To him, it wasn't a badge of honor. It was a life sentence. It represented a world of small dreams and smaller paychecks, a world where ambition was a luxury no one could afford. He saw his future in the stooped shoulders of the older men on the line, in their tired, resigned eyes. He saw it in his father's persistent cough, a rattling, ugly sound that seemed to echo through their small house. He was terrified of becoming a ghost in his own life, his greatest achievement being a perfect attendance record at a job he hated. His escape, his secret rebellion, happened in the dead of night. While the rest of the street slept, the blue glow of a second-hand computer monitor would illuminate Leo's face in the tiny box room he'd had since childhood. This was his real world. Here, he wasn't Leo the factory worker. He was a creator, a builder of digital worlds. His passion, his obsession, was game design. For 3 years, he had been meticulously crafting a game he called Ethereum. It was a vast, open-world adventure set in a floating city of clockwork and steam, where players could soar on mechanical wings and unravel an ancient mystery. He poured every ounce of his creativity, every frustrated dream, into its code. He taught himself programming from library books and online tutorials, his fingers often stiff and aching from the day's labor clumsily tapping at the keyboard through the night. The game was his lighthouse, his promise of another shore, far from the grinding roar of Grayson's. One Tuesday, a day indistinguishable from any other, the siren's shriek felt particularly vicious. Leo's head throbbed from a late night spent debugging a stubborn piece of code. As the conveyor belt clanked to life, his mind was still in the clouds of Ethereum, not on the river of mundane metal parts flowing toward him. His friend Mark, who worked the belt next to him, nudged him. "You look like death warmed up, mate. Another night with your digital mistress?" Leo managed a weak smile. "Something like that. Almost got the flight mechanics right." Mark shook his head, a mixture of admiration and pity in his eyes. He was a lifer, content with his weekends at the pub and his new baby at home. He didn't understand Leo's obsession, but he respected the sheer stubbornness of it. "Just don't let Foreman Harris see you zoning out. He's been a right bear today." But Leo's focus was shattered. His body was at the belt, but his spirit was miles away, tweaking code, designing levels. A flawed bracket, warped and jagged, slid past him. His hand, moving on autopilot, picked it up, deemed it good, and placed it with the approved parts. He didn't even notice. An hour later, the entire production line shuddered to a catastrophic halt. A scream of shearing metal, a shower of sparks, and then an ominous silence broken only by alarms. The flawed bracket Leo had missed had jammed in a precision calibrator, destroying it and causing a chain reaction down the line. Foreman Harris's face was purple with rage. He stormed down the line, his finger pointing like a weapon directly at Leo. The tirade that followed was loud, personal, and humiliating, conducted in front of the entire silent, watching shift. The words, careless, useless, and waste of space, bounced off the metal walls and hammered into Leo's soul. He was suspended for a week without pay. The walk home was the longest of his life. The weight of his failure was a physical pressure on his chest. The suspension wasn't just a punishment, it was a financial disaster. The rent on their cramped house, his father's medicine, the bills, it was a delicate house of cards, and his paycheck was the foundation. And beneath the practical fear was a deeper, more terrifying shame. He had become the very thing he hated, an incompetent cog. He dreaded telling his father. Arthur was sitting in his worn armchair, watching a game show on the small television, a blanket over his knees despite the warmth of the day. "Home early, son?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. Leo couldn't meet his eyes. He stared at the faded floral pattern on the carpet. "Suspended, Dad. A week." The silence that followed was heavier than Foreman Harris's shouting. Arthur slowly muted the television. "What happened?" "I made a mistake. A bad one. Shut down the line." Leo's voice was thick with self-loathing. Arthur sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of his 40 years at Grayson's. Leo, when are you going to stop chasing these fantasies? This game nonsense. It's time to put your head down, son. Be a man. Do your job. There's dignity in that. There's success in reliability." Those words, meant as gentle advice, were like a knife to Leo's heart. Dignity? This felt like anything but. His dream, Ethereum, was the only thing that gave him any dignity at all. To have it dismissed as a fantasy by the man he loved most was a pain worse than any humiliation from Foreman Harris. "It's not a fantasy, Dad," Leo said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "It's real. It's what I'm meant to do. This is the fantasy." He gestured wildly around the small, tired room. "Just waiting for the days to end. This isn't living." Arthur's face hardened. "It's providing. It's responsibility. Something you seem to be failing at right now. That computer of yours is a distraction. Maybe it's time it found a new home." The threat hung in the air, cold and final. Leo turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him, his heart pounding with a rage he didn't know he possessed. He walked for hours, through streets that grew progressively rougher. The neat suburban houses giving way to boarded-up shops and graffiti-scrawled walls. His feet, almost of their own accord, led him to a part of town he usually avoided. And there, in the window of a dusty, neon-lit pawn shop, he saw it. It was an old, slightly battered laptop, but its specs, listed on a handwritten card, were light years ahead of his own struggling machine. It could render his game's graphics in a fraction of the time. It could handle the complex physics of Ethereum's flying mechanics without crashing every 10 minutes. It was the key, the answer to all his technical problems. He stared at the price tag. It was exactly the amount he would have earned from his week's suspension. A week's pay he no longer had. A desperate, crazy idea began to form in his mind. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. But the voice of Foreman Harris, useless, and the disappointed face of his father, be a man, echoed in his head. This was his chance to prove them wrong, to prove himself right. That night, with his father's rattling cough as the only sound in the house, Leo made the worst decision of his life. He took his mother's delicate silver locket, the only thing of value she had left behind when she passed away years ago. His father kept it in a small wooden box on his dresser, a sacred relic. Leo's hands shook as he held it. It felt cold and heavy with guilt. He told himself it was just a loan. He would pawn it, buy the laptop, finish his game, sell it for millions, and buy the locket back 100 times over. He crafted the entire fairy tale in his head, using it to smother the voice of his conscience. The next morning, he sold the locket. The pawn shop owner, a man with tired eyes and nicotine-stained fingers, barely glanced at it before counting out the cash. The transaction was cold, quick, and utterly devoid of the significance Leo felt. He then walked to the computer shop, the money burning a hole of shame in his pocket, and bought the laptop. For the next 6 days, he lived in a fever dream of guilt and exhilaration. He told his father he was looking for odd jobs, but he spent every waking hour locked in his room, the new laptop humming powerfully on his desk. The difference was astounding. Code compiled in seconds. The world of Ethereum blossomed before his eyes, more beautiful and real than he had ever imagined. He poured his guilt, his fear, his hope, everything into the game. It was his confession and his redemption, all at once. On the evening of the 6th day, he finished it. The final line of code was written, the last bug squashed. Ethereum was complete. Exhausted but euphoric, he uploaded it to a popular online platform for indie game developers, set a price, and collapsed into bed, dreaming of reviews and royalty notifications. He was woken a few hours later by the sound of his father's voice. It wasn't the usual cough. It was something else, something raw and guttural. Leo rushed into his father's room. Arthur was on the floor, clutching his chest, his face ashen, struggling to breathe. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Leo. He fumbled for the phone, called an ambulance, and held his father's hand, all the while a mantra screaming in his head, "No, no, no, not now, please, not now." In the stark, sterile whiteness of the hospital waiting room, time lost all meaning. The beeping of monitors, the hushed voices of nurses, the smell of antiseptic, it all blurred into a nightmare of anxiety. A doctor finally emerged, his face grim. "He's stable," the doctor said, and Leo felt a wave of relief so powerful his knees buckled. But it was a severe attack. His lungs are very weak. He's going to need a new medication regimen. It's quite expensive, I'm afraid. And he'll need constant care. You should prepare yourself. The doctor handed Leo a leaflet for Silver Oaks, a residential care facility. It looked nice. It also looked exorbitantly expensive. Then he handed him the estimated cost of the new medications. The numbers on the page swam before Leo's eyes. It was more than he made in 3 months at Grayson's. The relief he'd felt curdled into a new, more profound terror. How could he possibly afford this? His suspension was almost over, but his paycheck was already spent on the laptop. The laptop bought with his mother's locket. The guilt returned, multiplied 1,000-fold. A physical sickness in his gut. He returned to work the next Monday, a hollow man. The factory sound seemed muted, distant. He performed his job with robotic precision, his mind a frantic calculator, trying and failing to solve an impossible equation. He avoided his father's eyes when he visited him at home, now bedridden and even quieter than before. The unspoken question hung between them. How will we manage? Every day, the first thing Leo did when he got home was check his games account. Ethereum had been downloaded 17 times. Total earnings, $85. It was a pitiful sum, a drop in the ocean of his new financial abyss. The reviews were kind but few. Interesting concept. Needs polish. Got stuck on level 3. His masterpiece, his ticket to freedom, was a flop. The pressure began to crush him. The bills piled up on the kitchen table. Final demand stamped in angry red ink. He started skipping meals, telling his father he'd eaten at work, just to save a few dollars. He sold his old computer for a pittance. It wasn't enough. The world, which had felt so full of possibility just weeks ago, was closing in, the walls of his life narrowing into a desperate, inescapable tunnel. One evening, he found the leaflet for Silver Oaks on his father's bedside table. Arthur was asleep, his breathing shallow. Leo looked from his father's frail form to the glossy photo of the luxurious facility. He would never be able to give him that. He could barely keep the roof over their heads. He was failing, utterly and completely. In a moment of pure, unadulterated despair, he did the unthinkable. He logged into the game developer platform, found the option, and with a click that felt like driving a nail into his own heart, he deleted Ethereum. He erased 3 years of his life. He killed his dream. It felt like a necessary funeral. The dream was a luxury he could no longer afford. His father was right. It was time to be a man, to give up, to surrender. The next day at the factory, he was a ghost. He moved through the motions. The hope, chodi shimie, chedi shimie, chodi, thoroughly, shimie, extinguish, chodi shimie, completely extinguished. The roar of the machinery was no longer an annoyance. It was a funeral dirge for his future. He was resigning himself to a life at Conveyor Belt 7. During his lunch break, he sat alone in the crowded canteen, pushing a limp salad around his plate. His phone buzzed. It was an email. He almost ignored it. Probably another bill, but the sender name caught his eye. Alara Vance. His breath hitched. Alara Vance was the founder of Vortex Games, one of the most respected indie game studios in the world. She was a legend. Why would she be emailing him? With trembling fingers, he opened it. Subject: Ethereum. Leo, I don't know if you'll even get this message. I've been trying to contact you through the platform for days, but your game seems to have vanished. I hope this email reaches you. I downloaded Ethereum last week. I was blown away. The world building, the artistry, the sheer ambition of it, it's raw, it needs polish, but my God, the soul in it is incredible. The flight mechanics alone are some of the most intuitive I've ever experienced. I must have played for 10 hours straight. I wanted to talk to you about the potential. I think Ethereum could be something truly special with the right support. Please call me. I'd love to discuss the possibility of Vortex funding its full development and publishing. Best, Elara. Leo read the email. Then he read it again and again. The noise of the canteen faded away. The world shrunk to the glowing screen of his phone. Vortex Games, Alara Vance, funding, publishing. And he had deleted it. A sound escaped his lips, a strangled mix of a sob and a laugh. People at nearby tables glanced at him strangely. He had thrown his dream away hours before it was saved. He had given up at the very finish line. The irony was so brutal, so perfectly horrific, that it was almost funny. He stumbled outside into the grimy factory yard, the cold air hitting his face. He felt like he was going to be sick. What had he done? He leaned against the cold brick wall, his head in his hands, the phone clutched like a lifeline. Ilara's words played on a loop in his mind. Blown away. Incredible. Truly special. A spark ignited in the ashes of his despair. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there. No. The word formed in his mind, quiet but firm. No, not like this. He had made a catastrophic mistake. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fix it. He still had the game. He had the entire project saved on the powerful new laptop. He had only deleted it from the online store. He didn't wait. He didn't go back to his station. He ran. He ran out of the factory gates. Foreman Harris shouting after him, his heart hammering against his ribs not from exertion, but from a terrifying, glorious, resurrected hope. He burst into his house, ignoring his father's call from the bedroom, and flew to his laptop. His hands shook as he navigated to the developer platform. With a few frantic clicks, he re-uploaded Ethereum. He then found Ilara's number in the email and called it. A calm, professional voice answered. Ilara Vance's office. Hi, Leo said, his voice breathless and cracking. This is Leo. Leo Matthews. She emailed me about my game, Ethereum. I need to speak with her, please. There was a pause. One moment, please. The hold music felt like it lasted a lifetime. Then a new voice came on the line, warm, energetic, and direct. Leo. Alara Vance. I am so glad you called. I was worried I'd lost you. The conversation that followed was a whirlwind. Ilara talked about game design with a passion that mirrored his own. She saw the flaws in Ethereum, but, more importantly, she saw the diamond in the rough. She offered him a development deal, an advance against future royalties that was more money than he had ever seen in his life. Enough to cover his father's medicine, enough to pay their bills, enough to let him quit Grayson's and work on the game full-time. When he hung up the phone, he was crying. He sat on the edge of his bed, tears of relief and joy streaming down his face. The weight was gone. The terrifying pressure had lifted. He had done it. He had actually done it. He walked into his father's room, the laptop in his hands. Arthur was awake, propped up on pillows, watching the window. Dad, Leo said, his voice thick with emotion. I need to show you something. He opened the laptop and booted up Ethereum. The screen filled with the breathtaking vista of the floating clockwork city, the sun glinting off brass towers, mechanical birds soaring through clouds of steam. He explained it to his father, not in terms of code or programming, but in terms of story and dreams. He told him about the email, about Alara Vance, about the deal. Arthur listened quietly, his eyes fixed on the screen, watching the intricate world his son had built from nothing. He saw the concentration on Leo's face, the passion in his voice, a passion he had never heard from him when he talked about the factory. When Leo finished, there was a long silence. Arthur slowly turned his head from the screen to look at his son. His eyes were wet. "You built all this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Leo nodded. "Yeah, Dad, I did." Arthur reached out a frail, trembling hand and placed it over Leo's. "Your mother. She would have been so proud of you," he said. I never understood. I thought it was just play. But this is real. You built a whole world." He paused, taking a labored breath. "I'm sorry, son. I was wrong." Those 3 words, "I was wrong," meant more to Leo than any contract, any amount of money. It was the absolution he didn't know he needed. The journey was far from over. The next year was a whirlwind of a different kind. Leo signed the contract with Vortex. He worked harder than he ever had in his life, but now it was a labor of love. He spent days in video calls with Alara and her team of artists and programmers, refining, polishing, and expanding Ethereum. It was challenging, often frustrating, but he was learning, growing, thriving. The advance money lifted the immediate financial siege. He was able to get his father the best care, a nurse who visited daily, and all the medication he needed. The color slowly returned to Arthur's cheeks, and though his lungs would never fully recover, the constant worry in his eyes began to fade. He became Leo's biggest, most unexpected fan, often asking to see the latest developments in the game. The launch of the finished version of Ethereum was a moment Leo would never forget. It wasn't a quiet upload to a small website. It was a proper release, promoted by Vortex, featured on gaming news sites, streamed by popular gamers. The reviews were stellar. They praised its innovation, its heart, its breathtaking world. It became a sleeper hit, then a bona fide success. Leo was no longer the man from Conveyor Belt 7. He was Leo Matthews, acclaimed game designer. One evening, about a year after the launch, Leo came home to the house he had now bought properly, a nicer place in a quieter neighborhood, with a garden for his father to sit in. He found Arthur in his new favorite armchair, a contented smile on his face. On the wall, next to Arthur's old Employee of the Month certificate, hung a new frame. Inside wasn't a certificate or a gold watch. It was his mother's silver locket. Leo had gone back to the pawn shop the week he got his first royalty check. The owner had remembered him, the desperate-looking young man who'd sold a piece of his heart. The locket was still there. Buying it back had felt like closing a circle, healing an old wound. Leo looked at the 2 frames side by side, his father's definition of success and his own. They weren't so different after all. Both were about dedication, about providing for those you love, about leaving a mark, however small, on the world. His father had done it with 40 years of reliable labor. Leo had done it by building a city in the sky. He realized then that success isn't a destination you arrive at with a fanfare. It's not a single, loud victory. It's the quiet, daily struggle to build something meaningful. It's the choice to get back up after you've been knocked down, to keep believing when everyone, including yourself, tells you to quit. It's the sound of a dream, patiently being built, note by note, in the silent hours of the night, until its music is finally loud enough for the whole world to hear. And the most important person it has to resonate with, first and foremost, is yourself.